My name is Dr. Khalid Rahman. I am 42 years old. And on March 15, 2023, I died for 11 minutes on the same operating table where I had saved over 3,000 lives. When you flatline in an ICU surrounded by the best cardiac team in Dubai, when your own colleagues are performing CPR on your chest, when the defibrillator shocks your body 3 times with no response, when 11 minutes pass without a single heartbeat, medical science has a word for what you are. Dead. But I'm here. I'm alive. And what happened during those 11 minutes changed absolutely everything. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to March 15th. Further back. To the man I was before my heart stopped beating. I was Dr. Khalid Rahman, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Emirates Central Hospital in Dubai. If you needed open-heart surgery in the United Arab Emirates and you had the money to afford the best, you called me. Sheikhs, billionaires, diplomats, oil executives, they all trusted me with their lives. And I never lost that trust. My success rate was 98.7%, the highest in the Gulf region. I lived on the 87th floor of a penthouse overlooking Dubai Marina. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Persian Gulf that looked like something from a dream. Marble imported from Italy, so cold beneath bare feet that even in the summer heat of 115 degrees outside, I needed slippers indoors. I drove a black Porsche 911 Turbo S to the hospital every morning, parked in my reserved spot, the one closest to the entrance with my name in gold letters on the sign. I wore a Patek Philippe watch worth more than most people's houses. I had everything. Everything except a reason to come home. My wife, Noor, her name means light in Arabic, and I used to think that was ironic because our home felt anything but bright. We'd been married for 15 years. 15 years of polite dinners and silence. 15 years of sleeping in the same bed but living in different worlds. She was quiet, devout, always praying in the corner of our bedroom 5 times a day. I would watch her sometimes, kneeling on her prayer mat, whispering in Arabic, and I'd think, what is she asking for? What does she still believe Allah will give her? I respected her faith the way you respect a tradition you've outgrown. I went to the mosque on Fridays when my schedule allowed, which was rarely. I fasted during Ramadan. Ramadan is the Islamic holy month where Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset for 29 or 30 days. But honestly, I was usually so busy in surgery that I barely noticed I hadn't eaten. My real God was medicine. My real prayer was the operating room. And my real salvation? The sound of a heart monitor returning to steady rhythm after I'd held that dying heart in my hands and brought it back to life. Have you ever held a human heart? Not metaphorically. Literally. Held the physical muscle that keeps a person alive, felt it struggling and weak in your palms, and known that you, only you, have the skill to save it? That's power. That's control. That was my addiction. I worked 16 to 18 hours a day. 6 days a week. Sometimes 7. My surgeries cost anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 depending on complexity. I performed at least 3 major operations per week. Do the math. I was making more money than I could spend, and yet I could never stop. There was always another heart to save. Always another life depending on me. But here's what I didn't see. I was saving hearts while my own was dying. March 15, 2023. Wednesday morning. I remember waking up at 5:17 a.m. to the sound of the call to prayer echoing from the mosque near our building. Noor was already awake, already on her prayer mat. I watched her for a moment in the dim morning light. Her lips moved silently. I wondered, not for the first time, what she was praying for. I never asked, and she never told me. I showered, dressed in my tailored Italian suit, grabbed my leather medical bag and drove to the hospital. I had a quadruple bypass scheduled for 8 a.m., a routine procedure if you can call cutting someone's chest open and rerouting their blood vessels routine. The patient was a 61-year-old British expat named Michael Harris. Heavy smoker. Obese. 3 previous heart attacks. His coronary arteries were so clogged that it was a miracle he was still alive. But I'd done this surgery hundreds of times. This was supposed to be easy. I scrubbed in at 7:45 a.m. My team was already prepping Michael in OR3, our largest operating room, the one with the newest equipment and the best lighting. Dr. Ahmed, my senior resident who'd worked with me for 10 years, stood across from me. 2 surgical nurses. An anesthesiologist. A perfusionist monitoring the heart-lung machine. Everyone knew their role. We'd done this dance so many times we could perform it in our sleep. At 8:03 a.m. I made the first incision. Sterile steel cutting through skin, through muscle, through the sternum bone. The rib spreader clicked open. And there it was, Michael's heart, struggling and swollen, barely pumping enough blood to keep him alive. Scalpel, I said. My voice was calm. It was always calm. I was in complete control. But at 8:47 a.m., something happened that had never happened before in my 20-year career. I felt pain. Not the kind of discomfort you ignore. Not a muscle cramp or indigestion. This was a crushing sensation in the center of my chest, like someone had wrapped a steel band around my rib cage and was tightening it with every breath. My left arm went numb. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The operating room lights suddenly seemed too bright, too hot. I knew immediately what it was. You don't spend 2 decades as a cardiac surgeon without recognizing the symptoms of a massive myocardial infarction. A heart attack. My heart attack. Dr. Ahmed, I said, and my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. Take over. He looked at me confused. Sir? I said take over. I stepped back from the table. My hands were shaking. The pain was spreading now, radiating up my jaw, down my left arm. The room tilted slightly. Dr. Rahman, are you? I didn't hear the rest of his question because my knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the operating table to steady myself, but my vision was already going dark around the edges. Someone shouted. Hands grabbed my arms. The last thing I saw before I collapsed was Michael's exposed heart, still beating weakly on the table, and I thought, who's going to save him now? I woke up on a gurney. Fluorescent lights rushing past overhead. Voices shouting medical terms I'd shouted 1,000 times myself. Acute STEMI. LAD 95% occlusion. Prep for emergency angioplasty. What? Left anterior descending artery. The Widowmaker. That's what we called it in medical school because when that artery blocks, you don't usually survive long enough to say goodbye. They wheeled me into OR 2. The room where I was supposed to be the one in control. But now I was the patient. Now I was the one staring up at the ceiling, feeling the cold 4 needles sliding into my arm, hearing my own heart monitor beeping irregularly. Dr. Ahmed stood over me. His face was pale. His hands trembled as he held the scalpel. Sir, we're going to take care of you. Just stay with us. I wanted to tell him he was holding the scalpel wrong. I wanted to tell him to calm down, to breathe, to remember his training. But I couldn't speak. My chest felt like it was caving in. And then I heard it. The sound every surgeon dreads. The sound I'd heard hundreds of times in my career, but always from the other side of the table. Bleh. Flatline. My heart stopped beating. Have you ever wondered what happens when you die? I used to think it was nothing. Just darkness. Just the end. The brain shuts down, the body goes cold, and that's it. Lights out. I'd seen enough people die on my operating table to believe that death was simply the absence of life. I was wrong. The darkness came first. But it wasn't empty. It was thick, suffocating, like being buried alive under 1,000 tons of black water. I was conscious, terrifyingly, impossibly conscious, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. And I was not alone. There was a weight pressing down on me. Not physical. Spiritual. Like every mistake I'd ever made, every pride-filled thought, every moment I'd chosen my own glory over someone else's dignity, all of it was piling on top of my chest, crushing me. I saw faces. Patients I'd lost. Not the successful surgeries. Only the failures. A 34-year-old woman who died because I'd been too tired to notice a complication. A 19-year-old boy whose family I'd brushed past in the waiting room because I was too busy to explain. An elderly man I'd dismissed as not worth the risk, because his insurance wouldn't cover my fee. I saw Noor. Sitting alone at our dining table, staring at an empty chair. How many nights had I left her like that? How many times had I chosen the operating room over coming home? And for the first time in my life I felt shame. Real, burning, unbearable shame. I wanted to apologize. To go back. To do everything differently. But there was no going back. This was judgment and I was being weighed. Have you ever felt your whole life being weighed and found wanting? I don't know how long I was in that darkness. Time didn't exist there. But just when I thought I would collapse under the weight of my own guilt, something changed. A light appeared. Not gradually. Not like a sunrise. This was instant, explosive, impossible to describe. Brighter than every surgical lamp I'd ever worked under combined, but somehow it didn't hurt my eyes. It was warm. It was alive. And it was coming toward me, or I was being pulled toward it, I couldn't tell which. And there was a presence in the light. Not a voice. Not yet. But a being. Someone who saw everything I'd done, every selfish choice, every moment of pride, and yet the shame began to lift. Not because my guilt disappeared, but because something greater than my guilt had arrived. Then I heard the voice. It wasn't Arabic. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I'd ever studied. But I understood every word perfectly, the way you understand your own thoughts. Khalid. My name. But not just my name. It was like hearing who I really was for the first time. Your wife calls my name. Will you answer? I didn't understand. My wife. Nor. What name was she calling? We prayed to Allah. We were Muslims. What was this voice talking about? The presence continued. You have spent your life holding hearts in your hands. Now I want to hold yours. And suddenly I understood, not intellectually but deep in whatever part of me still existed in that place. This wasn't Allah. This was someone else. Someone whose name I'd never seriously considered. Someone I'd dismissed as a Western religion, a faith for foreigners, not for people like me. Jesus. Noor had called the name of Jesus. And Jesus had answered. I felt two directions pulling at me. The darkness below, heavy and familiar, filled with guilt and shame and emptiness. And the light above, terrifyingly bright, offering something I'd never experienced. Not success. Not control. Not power. Well, for the first time in my 42 years of life, I didn't trust my own abilities. I didn't trust my surgical skills, my intelligence, my status, my wealth. None of it mattered here. None of it could save me. I surrendered. I didn't say the words out loud. I couldn't speak. But in whatever way you communicate in that place between life and death, I whispered, or thought, or screamed into the void, take me. Please, take me. The light consumed everything. And then I heard the sound again. But this time it was different. Beep, 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 beep. My heart monitor. Regular rhythm. Steady. Alive. I opened my eyes. White ceiling tiles. Fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic and recycled air. An ICU room. I was alive. I had tubes in my throat, IVs in both arms, monitoring wires stuck to my chest. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck. But I was alive. Dr. Ahmed's face appeared above me, tears streaming down his cheeks. You're back. Oh God, you're back. Khalid, you were gone for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. We couldn't get a rhythm. We shocked you 3 times. Nothing worked. And then your heart just started beating again on its own. We hadn't even charged the defibrillator for a 4th attempt. I tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented it. But my lips moved. And the word that formed, the word that made no sense to everyone in that room, the word that would change absolutely everything, was this. Jesus. Dr. Ahmed stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But I hadn't lost my life. Against every medical probability, against 11 minutes without oxygen, against a 95% blocked artery and total cardiac arrest, I was alive. And I knew exactly who had brought me back. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Maybe you've heard stories like this before. Maybe you're skeptical. Maybe you think it was just oxygen deprivation or hallucination or my brain creating meaning out of chaos. I'm a doctor. I understand the science of near-death experiences. I know the medical explanations. But if you've stayed with me this far, if something in this story resonates with you, let me ask you to do something. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. Not for entertainment. But because what I'm about to tell you next, what happened in the days and weeks after I came back, might be exactly what you need to hear right now. And I don't want you to miss it. I spent 6 days in the ICU. 6 days of physical recovery. But something else was happening that had nothing to do with my damaged heart muscle or my recovering arteries. I was spiritually awake for the first time in my life. I couldn't stop thinking about the light. The voice. The name that had come from my lips when I woke up. Jesus. Why Jesus? I was a Muslim. I'd been raised in a Muslim family. I'd prayed Islamic prayers my entire life, when I bothered to pray at all. Jesus was for Christians. Jesus was for Westerners. Jesus wasn't for people like me. But Jesus had been in that light. I knew it the way you know your own reflection. Noor stayed with me 24 hours a day. She brought me water, adjusted my pillows, held my hand when the pain medication wore off. And for the first time in 15 years I actually saw her. Not as the quiet wife who managed the house. Not as the religious woman I'd intellectually respected but emotionally ignored. I saw her as a human being who had been carrying something alone for a very long time. On the 3rd day when we were alone, no nurses, no doctors, just the 2 of us in that sterile ICU room, I asked her the question I should have asked years ago. Noor. My voice was still weak, raspy from the breathing tube. When I collapsed, you prayed. But you didn't pray to Allah. She froze. Her hand, which had been holding mine, tensed. She looked at the door like she was calculating whether she could escape. Please, I said. I need to know. Who did you pray to? She was silent for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Jesus. I prayed to Jesus. In Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates where we lived, that confession could destroy a marriage. Could destroy a life. Leaving Islam is apostasy. The punishment ranges from social ostracism to imprisonment to death, depending on who finds out and how public you make it. But I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt relief. Like a door I'd been standing in front of my whole life had finally opened. Tell me about him, I said. And she did. For 6 days while my body healed, Noor told me her story. How 3 years earlier she'd befriended a Filipino nurse named Maria at a charity event. How Maria had given her a Bible. Christians call it the sacred text of their faith, divided into the Old Testament and New Testament, with the life and teachings of Jesus recorded in 4 books called the Gospels. How Noor had hidden that Bible in our house, reading it late at night when I was at the hospital, terrified I would find it and divorce her. How she'd read about Jesus healing the sick, raising the dead, loving the outcasts and forgiving the sinners. How she'd read about his death on a cross, crucifixion, a brutal Roman execution method where victims were nailed to wooden crosses, and his resurrection 3 days later. How she'd prayed in secret for 3 years, asking this Jesus to reveal himself as real. I was so alone, Khalid, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell anyone. I was terrified you'd leave me. Terrified my family would disown me. But I couldn't stop reading about him. I couldn't stop feeling that he was real. How many people around you are carrying secrets that could set them free if only they felt safe enough to share? On the 5th day, Noor brought her Bible to the hospital, hidden in her handbag. She opened it to a page she'd marked with a torn piece of paper and handed it to me. I read the words slowly in English because the Bible she had was in English. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. John chapter 10 verse 10. The words of Jesus. And I understood. I'd been alive for 42 years but I'd never truly lived. I'd had success, wealth, status, power, but my soul had been dead the entire time. And it took literally dying, flatlining on an operating table, meeting Jesus in the space between life and death, for me to finally come alive. I looked at Noor, this woman I'd ignored for 15 years, this woman who'd been praying for me in secret. This woman whose faith had somehow reached across the veil of death and pulled me back, and I said the words I should have said years ago. I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing you. For not listening. For choosing my career over our marriage. I'm sorry. She broke down sobbing. And for the first time since our wedding day we held each other and cried together. On the 6th day I asked Noor to teach me how to pray. Not Islamic prayers. Christian prayers. She looked terrified. We were still in Dubai. The walls had ears. But she nodded. It's not about rituals, she said quietly. It's about talking to him. Like he's right here in the room with us. Because he is. So I closed my eyes. And I talked to Jesus the way you talk to someone sitting next to your hospital bed. I thanked him for bringing me back. I apologized for ignoring him my entire life. I asked him to forgive me for the pride, the arrogance, the coldness. And I asked him to show me what living, truly living, looked like. I didn't hear an audible voice. But I felt peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on success or wealth or control. The kind that exists even when everything else falls apart. I was discharged from the hospital on March 21st, exactly 6 days after I died. Dr. Ahmed pulled me aside before I left. Khalid, he said, looking uncomfortable, I need to tell you something. When you woke up, when you said that name, people heard. It's spreading. I'm trying to keep it quiet, but... He trailed off. I understood what he wasn't saying. In our world, in our culture, what I'd done, saying Jesus' name, the implication that I'd called on a Christian God, was dangerous. Thank you for trying to protect me, I said. But Ahmed, I can't take it back. He saved me. And I'm not going to pretend he didn't. Ahmed looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. I went back to work 2 weeks later. My cardiologist had cleared me for surgery, though he'd insisted I reduce my hours and manage my stress. I agreed. But not because I was worried about another heart attack. I agreed because I finally had a reason to come home. But working at Emirates Central Hospital was different now. I was different now. Every time I held a heart in my hands during surgery, I prayed silently. Not for my success. Not for my reputation. But for the person whose life depended on that heart. I prayed that Jesus would guide my hands the way he guided me back from death. My colleagues noticed. Dr. Hassan, a friend for 15 years, someone I'd trained with, someone I'd trusted, pulled me aside one day in the surgeon's lounge. You're different, he said bluntly. Softer. You mention God more. You spend less time at the hospital. He paused. Have you left Islam? I could have lied. I should have lied. In Dubai, in the medical community where reputation is everything, the smart thing to do was deny, deflect, change the subject. But I couldn't. Jesus had died for truth. How could I deny him to save my comfort? I have not left God, I said carefully. I have found him. Hassan understood immediately. His face went cold. You're serious? You've actually converted to Christianity. Hassan. Don't. He stood up. Don't explain. Don't justify. Just stay away from me. I can't be associated with an apostate. He walked out. We never spoke again. Within 2 weeks, rumors were everywhere. The hospital administration called me in for a meeting, where they very politely suggested I might want to consider taking an extended leave of absence. My surgery schedule suddenly had cancellations. Patients who'd waited months for appointments with me were suddenly requesting different surgeons. Noor's family was worse. Her brother came to our home, screaming at her to divorce me before I destroyed her life. Her mother called every day, weeping, begging her to leave me and come back to the family. They threatened to disown her. They threatened to report us to authorities. And I realized we couldn't stay in Dubai. The choice was impossible. Stay and pretend, go back to Islam publicly while following Jesus in secret, keep our wealth and status and safety. Or leave. Leave everything. Lose everything. For a faith we'd only just discovered. Noor and I prayed together for 3 days. And then we made the decision. We would leave. In December 2023, 9 months after I died and came back to life, Noor and I boarded a plane to Toronto, Canada. We entered as refugees. Not political refugees. Not economic refugees. Refugees of faith. People fleeing religious persecution. We couldn't bring our money. Transferring large sums from the UAE would have raised red flags, questions we couldn't answer without lying. We sold what we could quietly, converted it to cash and carried what was allowed. We lost 90% of our wealth. The penthouse. The cars. The watches. The life we'd built. But we didn't lose each other. And we didn't lose Jesus. Toronto in December was freezing. We'd never experienced real winter. We'd never experienced being poor. We rented a small 1-bedroom apartment in Scarborough, that's an eastern district of Toronto, for $1,800 a month. The walls were thin. The heating barely worked. It was smaller than our walk-in closet in Dubai. But when Noor and I prayed together in that tiny apartment, thanking Jesus for protecting us, for giving us freedom, for giving us each other, we felt richer than we'd ever felt in the 87th floor penthouse. I had to start my medical career over from zero. In Canada, foreign doctors must go through an extensive validation process. I had to pass equivalency exams, complete additional residency training, prove my skills all over again. I was 43 years old, training alongside residents in their 20s, living on a resident's salary of $60,000 a year, less than I used to make in a single surgery. But I didn't complain. How could I? Jesus had given me life. Not just biological life. Real life. Life with purpose. Life with meaning. Life with love. It took 18 months, but in June 2025, just 5 months ago, I was fully licensed to practice cardiac surgery in Ontario. I now work at Toronto General Hospital. I don't operate on sheiks anymore. I operate on refugees, immigrants, people who can't afford private health care, people who remind me of who Noor and I have become. And here's what's happened since we arrived. Noor and I started opening our home to other ex-Muslims who'd fled persecution. At first it was just one family, a couple from Pakistan who'd converted and been disowned. Then another family from Saudi Arabia. Then more. Our tiny apartment became a gathering place. We'd pray together, share meals, share our stories. Last year we started a ministry called Hearts for Christ. It's a network of Christian doctors, many of them ex-Muslims like me, who provide medical care to refugees who fled religious persecution. We've helped 47 families so far. I've personally performed 12 heart surgeries completely free of charge for refugees who had no other options. I spent 20 years replacing diseased hearts with healthy ones. I was good at it. The best in the region. But I didn't understand until I died that there's a surgery only Jesus can perform. Medical science can repair a damaged heart. But only Jesus can replace a heart of stone with a heart of flesh. Medical science brought me back to life for 11 minutes. But Jesus brought me back to life forever. So let me ask you something. Are you alive right now, or are you just breathing? Your heart is beating. Blood is flowing through your veins. But is your soul alive? Do you wake up with purpose, or do you wake up with emptiness? Do you go to sleep grateful, or do you go to sleep wondering if this is all there is? I had everything the world says will make you happy. Money, status, success, power. I saved thousands of lives. And I was dead inside. Until Jesus brought me back. If you've watched this far, if something in this story has touched you, I want to ask you to do something. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Not because I need the views, but because maybe, just maybe, someone you know is where I was. Someone you love is living with a dead heart. And they need to know that Jesus can resurrect them just like he resurrected me. If Jesus can resurrect a dead heart surgeon on an operating table in Dubai, if he can reach into the ICU after 11 minutes of clinical death and bring someone back with his name on their lips, if he can give a Muslim doctor and his wife the courage to lose everything and gain everything at the same time, then he can resurrect whatever is dead inside you today. Your career, your marriage, your hope, your purpose. Whatever has flatlined in your life, Jesus specializes in resurrection. I don't know who you are watching this right now. I don't know if you're a Christian who needs to be reminded of the power of prayer. I don't know if you're a Muslim who's secretly questioning. I don't know if you're someone who doesn't believe in anything but came across this video and can't explain why you're still watching. But I know this, you're still watching for a reason. And that reason is probably the same reason my wife prayed the prayer that brought me back from death. Because Jesus is real. Because he hears. Because he answers. Because he resurrects. My name is Dr. Khalid Rahman. I am 44 years old. I live in Toronto, Canada. I'm a cardiac surgeon. I'm a refugee. I'm an ex-Muslim. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And on March 15, 2023, I died for 11 minutes. But I've been alive every single day since. If you want to know more about my story, if you want to connect with the Hearts for Christ ministry, if you're an ex-Muslim who needs help or you're someone who wants to support refugees fleeing persecution, the information is in the description below. But more than anything, I want you to know this. Jesus didn't bring me back from death so I could live a comfortable life. He brought me back to tell you that he's real, that he loves you, that he's reaching toward you right now the same way he reached toward me in that light. The only question is, will you reach back?